Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see everybody as we come to our study, our continued study of the book of Shemot, of Exodus. So we are in Parshat MIshpatim this morning. It is a law code, a collection of law that we find in the book of Exodus. For us, a lot of these laws don't seem to go together because it's not done in categories that we necessarily would put things in. But if you remember, Israel is at this point a theocracy. God is the head of the whole state. God is the one deserving of loyalty, fealty, and God is the one to enforce that with exile as the punishment if the people betray their obligation of loyalty to God. God is the ruler of the people. God is the lawgiver to the people. This is similar, as we talked about last week, it's similar to other ancient Near Eastern understandings of the law. It is the king who gives the law. The king is the authority behind the law. And in our case, that is true as well. The king gives the law. The king is the lawgiver. In our case, however, it's not a human king. Even when there is a human king in Israel, the human king is subject to divine law. So the people are ruled by a king. The king is God, and God's law is absolute. So for the Israelites, ritual law and moral and ethical law are all going to cross over each other all over the place because there's not a big categorical difference. If you're being instructed ritually how you're supposed to interact with the king, that's not so different from how you're supposed to act with each other. They're not just different universes. So for Israelites, these law codes made sense, how they're put together. We're not going to spend a lot of time with the text. If you want, you can go to earlier, really early podcasts on this parsha, and I would unpack the ancient Near Eastern context for these laws, what some of the language means, technically what these laws are involving and are about, so that you can appreciate why even bother with them, like what was going on that they needed these laws. So earlier podcasts have that. We're going to spend some time given our situation today, we're going to actually be looking at some commentary on this whole idea of the laws about the ger, the laws about the stranger, because I found some interesting stuff on that this morning. All right. So let's take a quick look at MIshpatim, at some of the text from MIshpatim. So we're at the end of chapter 22, about to begin chapter 23. There's chapter 23. So at the end of 22, it's one of the places that we get this business about, the vulnerable. So verse 20, you shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not ill-treat any widow or orphan. If you mistreat them, I will heed their outcry as soon as they cry out to me, and my anger shall blaze forth, and I will put you to the sword, and your own wives shall become widows, and your children orphans. This is rhetorical language that is meant to say, if you perpetrate this on the vulnerable, believe me when I say I'm going to have it happen to you. So it's very flowery, scary language, but it's the most intense I think you can command people out of is what would it feel like if your kids were orphans and didn't have protection, right? Widows and orphans did not have protection. They didn't have the protection of a male. And that's what the family was based on, was how the men of the family could protect the clan. If you lend money to my people, to the poor among you, do not act toward them as a creditor, exact no interest from them. Right. So this is not a great business model for people looking to make money, right, on their capital. But this is what Torah says. You may be blessed with capital, and someone who's trying to start a business doesn't have capital to start that business, but is trying to, make their lives better. Therefore, you who have capital have to lend it to them and cannot charge them for that. So you must lend, and you can't charge them interest. If you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, right? So there's essentially their sleeping cloak. You must return it before the sun sets. It is the only available clothing. It is what covers their skin. In what else shall they sleep? Therefore, if your neighbor cries out to me, I will pay heed, for I am compassionate. All right. So notice that this ki yitzak elai, when they cry out to me, both the widow and the orphan, and in this case, your neighbor. This is this business of crying out. And if you'll remember, this is the language used when the people cry out in Egypt. That's when God responds and delivers them from the house of bondage. It's when they cry out. So there seems to be something about the cry of the oppressed, the unjustly oppressed, that reaches the divine and that triggers divine action. You shall not revile God, nor put a curse upon a chieftain among your people. You shall not put off the skimming of the first yield of your vats. You shall give me the male firstborn among your children, right? So from the vats, you have to give a certain amount to God. Don't delay in doing that, meaning don't be grumpy about it. Just, understand everything you have is a gift, and you need to give some of that back. And of course, the male firstborn are commanded to be given to God for service. Turns out, that's not really what God wants. Kind of like the Israeli army. They don't want yeshiva buchers, really. They would like them to do civil service, but they really don't want yeshiva buchers because they have to train them and deal with them. And they're not very good athletes and, people using their bodies. So, that's a gross generalization, I know. So if I get any hate mail about this, I'm telling you what I've heard from Israeli officials. So this is the same thing. The firstborn are not necessarily cut out for service, right? So what happens is God, of course, takes the Levites in place of the firstborn. The Levites become the tribe that will serve God. They become the priests and the tenders of the tabernacle and all of the sacrifices and ritual, all of that. And that is the redemption of the firstborn. So the firstborn among the people Israel are redeemed by the Levites. You shall be holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. So we are supposed to eat that which makes us reflective of being a holy people. That means we don't eat carrion. We don't eat roadkill. For us, it's like, why? What's the difference? Bert would have a long explanation for you about it. We are what we eat kind of thing, because I love Bert and I've known him for 15 years on this parsha. But for us, there's a separation between ritual stuff and being a holy people and what we eat and whatever. Not so in the ancient world and not so in ancient Israel. And you've heard me say it before. I will say it again. I wish we would get back to some of this. I wish we would get back to an understanding that what we eat is not cut off or separated in any way from us being a holy people. Our consumption is directly expressive of our values, directly expressive of what we believe is permitted and not permitted in terms of living in line with holiness, being people that are committed to holiness. All right. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty. Whenever I study this with B'nai Mitzvah kids, this whole parsha, or any parsha that contains laws, I ask them, so how do you think we're doing? Because we tend to think, this is 3,000 years ago. This has nothing to do with me. I'm not going to eat roadkill. Duh, I don't need any of this. But if we really look at the text, there's a lot of it that it's like, okay, people, turn on the news. How are we doing? Listen to your parents' conversation. How are we doing? That you shall not twist your testimony in order to grant favor from, to get the favor of important people. That is siding with the mighty to do wrong. How we doing, people? How do you think we're doing? When you encounter your enemy's ox or donkey wandering, you must take it back. Hashev teshivenu. You've heard me give several sermons on this. The command to return what's missing from your neighbor. When you see the donkey of your enemy lying under its burden and would refrain from raising it, you must nevertheless help raise it, right? So if it belongs to your neighbor and that donkey is struggling, you might be tempted to say, I'm not helping. It's the person I don't like. But who are we really talking about? Are we really talking about the neighbor you don't like? No. Who are we actually talking about suffering here? The donkey, right? You don't get to take out on the donkey. You don't get to yell and smack the neighbor's dog for barking. Let's just say, constantly, all the time, 24/7. You don't get to do that because it's not the dog's fault. You have to email the owner of the dog. Okay, you get my point. So you shall not subvert the rights of your needy in their disputes, meaning just because they're poor, they have absolute right to fair counsel and representation. Keep far from a false charge, right? So don't just deny false charges. Don't be anywhere around folks who are doing stuff that you might get splattered with. Just stay away from it, right? Good parental advice. Do not bring death on those who are innocent and in the right, for I will not acquit the wrongdoer. Right? Minnesota, to U.S. citizens, just saying. Do not take bribes, for bribes blind the clear-sighted and upset the pleas of those who are in the right. Bribery comes in many different fashions, many different styles. So make sure you're not among the ones taking them. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. So we began with that, and we're gonna stay there. So you shall not wrong or oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then we get at 23, we get it again. And it's phrased just a little bit differently. You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the nefesh hager. You know the self of the stranger, because y'all were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim. All right, I want to stick with this for a little bit. All right, we're going to listen to a little bit of an interview with Leon Kass. I'm giving you the text, but I have to start the interview text. We're going to start here. About God speaks to the people at the mountain. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Luna, come. Now, as a historical statement in the text, that's true, right? I took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. He is the same one here on the mountain who was the one who brought you out of Egypt and then redundantly out of the house of bondage. Suggestion, and then he's going to give you his suggestion. All right, so I'm going to start at the end of that paragraph, and this is his voice.
The Israelites are told, basically, you people have two great and enduring possibilities. You can either be aligned with me and follow me and have a relation with me, or the alternative is there's the land of Egypt and the house of bondage. Those are the two enduring human possibilities. Either some relation with God or live in the kind of way that ultimately will lead to being enslaved to men and to the mightiest of men. And I think that even though the language of freedom doesn't occur, I think it can speak to our understanding of freedom in the following ways. First of all, if freedom is opposed to being in bondage, it's clear. They're no longer subordinate to human will and to despotism. Second, they acquire national self-rule under wise legislation, in this case, divinely given and or inspired. And the rule of law is consented to. The covenant is consented to. And this rule of law, unlike comparable law of the ancient Near East, all are equal before this law. There's not one law for the nobles and one law for the commons. Third, the law doesn't speak this language, but the law aims to free people internally from the enslaving passions, from fear and despair because we think we are lowly and of no consequence, from the opposite pride and hubris because we tend to believe in our human superiority and self-sufficiency, from our greed and stinginess because we think the world is inhospitable and will not provide for us. And in a way, freedom here means not doing as you please, but doing as you should so that you will no longer be slave to Pharaoh or be enslaved within. I mean, the formula would be getting the slaves out of Egypt was the easy part. Getting Egypt out of the slaves took forever and is not finished. These are people who have been emancipated, have been delivered from servitude to acquire a way of life, a kind of law that will make them free to be what it means to be the only creature made in God's image.
I love that what he's talking about is what we began talking about last week, that the language is not freedom in Torah. The Exodus story is talked about by many peoples as the struggle for freedom and the importance in our story about freedom. He points out that is nowhere in the text. Nowhere does Torah use the language for freedom when it talks about the Exodus. It talks about liberation and redemption and deliverance. Because the point is not freedom. The point is to be a people with a law that frees us from our own enslavement to powerful other human beings and from our own proclivities. So the law frees us to be people the way we should be, people created in the image of God, with the understanding that God, what does that mean? It means God is just, God is righteous, God is holy, God is fair, right? God protects the vulnerable. All those things, if you're created in the image of God, that is what you should be. And that is why we were freed from servitude to Pharaoh, so that we could build a society reflective of the values to serve God. Yes? Yes, Dana.
So my thought is that it's might be easier to stay enslaved than be free. That some people even today might make the choice to remain enslaved because they don't have to make any decisions for themselves. Think about what you should do and, to do the just thing. That maybe there are a lot of people around that just choose to be, followers and enslaved, not make good choices.
Right. Or who make an argument that they don't have a choice, right? Which I think is often the case. Oh, well, that's just how it is. Like, I didn't create the world. I didn't make society this way. It's not my fault, right? And therefore I don't have to do anything. Okay. So, yeah, Rick.
Kass is a very easy guy to listen to and to like. The idea that there really is not a geographic cure. You can leave, but you got to start working. And that's a wonderful way to put it.
So I also want to spend some time looking at the language of stranger, because I really loved some of that this week that I came across as teaching. And I don't think I've really spent much time thinking about this. Let's go to my guy. The Torah obviously is teaching us to be compassionate and charitable. But in delineating the obligation to care for the stranger, it uses surprising language. The Torah could have said, have mercy on the oppressed, because you were oppressed in Egypt, or have compassion on slaves, because you were slaves in Egypt. But it does not say these things. Rather, it invokes our experience in Egypt as an impetus for us to identify with and help the stranger. Who is a stranger? In biblical times, this was a non-Israelite who lived among Israelites. And later rabbinic thought the stranger is identified as a proselyte, right, like a convert. In our days, it applies to a person of different nationality, an immigrant. What is the nature of being a stranger? The stranger is an outsider, someone not from our kin or clan, someone from another culture or religion, someone who is not, quote, one of us. We might naturally feel responsibility for our own group, but why should we be concerned with strangers? The Torah, remarkably, commands us to love the strangers as ourselves. The Torah justifies this commandment, for you know the soul of the stranger. Because of our early experience as strangers in Egypt, we know firsthand what it means to be considered an alien. We not only suffered physical abuse as slaves in Egypt, we suffered psychological abuse. We were considered as lesser human beings. We were thought to be unworthy of basic human rights. We know deep in our soul what it's like to be a stranger. We are uniquely qualified to understand the soul of the stranger. That language we just got, nefesh hager. This lesson from antiquity has had ongoing meaning for Jews throughout history. Blah, 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 blah. Because we have been immigrants, we know the soul of immigrants. We have an inherent understanding of the challenges they face. We recognize the importance of helping them adapt to their new lands and to enable them to overcome the psychological stigma of being outsiders. If the Torah needed to issue 36 commandments, which it does, about caring for stranger, it means that we have a strong tendency not to be concerned for them. Indeed, there are many voices in contemporary society that take a dim view toward receiving immigrants. After all, these outsiders may be criminals or terrorists. They will cost us a lot of money in order to provide them social, educational, and health services. They may take away jobs from native-born citizens. They can change the nature of our society if they come in excessively large numbers. We're going to skip the part about Sodom and Gomorrah. As a rule, I love this part. As a rule, people do not become immigrants unless there are compelling reasons for them to leave their own lands. They are fleeing wars, violence, or terrorism. They are fleeing from oppressive governments. They are escaping desperate poverty. They seek a better life for themselves and their families. Our instinctive response must be to lend a helping hand. We know the soul of the strangers because we and our forebears were strangers. Yet we are told that not all the immigrants seeking haven in our country are innocent refugees. There may be terrorists or criminals among them who wish to do us harm. While these claims cannot be summarily dismissed, neither should they create an exaggerated fear that endangers the vast majority of immigrants who legitimately need our aid. The government must have a humane and compassionate system of vetting that can detect the problematic individuals who wish to enter our country with bad intentions. Rabbi Yitzchak Shmuel Reggio, a 19th century Italian Torah commentator, commented on the verse in Leviticus, commanding us to love our neighbor as ourselves. He pointed out that the verse should be understood to be saying, love your neighbor because your neighbor is like yourself. Your neighbor is also created in the image of God. The same comment applies to the commandment to love the stranger as ourselves. All human beings have a unique kinship. Instead of seeing others as outsiders, we need to see them as sharing a universal humanity based on all of us having been created by the Almighty. The Torah knows that it is difficult to achieve this high level of understanding. That's why it has underscored the obligation to take care of the strangers 36 times. But it also knows that we are capable of achieving this level of understanding. And when we do, we not only fulfill God's commandments, we fulfill our own humanity. I just don't think there was a more on-the-nose Torah commentary on our Parsha for today, and it was not written this week. It was not written this year for this moment, but it's a reminder, since it wasn't, it's a reminder, right, that we constantly have to be addressing this. And of course, now more than ever, we see what happens when we allow fear of, the immigrants who might wish us harm or want to exploit, our situation. Well, we're seeing the consequences of that exaggerated fear everywhere, obviously. For me, I do find it fascinating now. I'll never be able to forget this or unlearn this now, that Torah doesn't say protect the oppressed because you were oppressed in Egypt. It doesn't say protect the slaves. We get laws protecting slaves. Don't get me wrong. We get laws, but it doesn't say because you were slaves in Egypt, you're going to protect the slaves this way. It says you will protect the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. So it seems that Torah finds the real danger is not in being oppressed or being slaves. There's a danger that comes before that makes those conditions possible. I think, I'm reading in here to, what this commentator is saying, but I think that's the argument, is that you only can oppress people and enslave them if you've already otherized them, right? And can do it to them because they're not you, right? You're treating them differently. You can only oppress them because you've already made them other than you. And that's the danger when we see people as strangers, meaning not us. And so the temptation is always to do us and them. And Torah understands that. Torah gets that. Torah doesn't say don't feel it. Don't have that instinct. Torah says don't do it. Protect them because your proclivity is going to be to do us and them. That's okay. We're hardwired. We know that. Anthropologically, we are hardwired to be suspicious of someone coming over the hill. Because once upon a time, they were carrying diseases we had no immunity to. So we are hardwired to be suspicious of the stranger, the foreigner, the not us, because at one time it probably meant serious danger, not just from attack, that's bad enough, but because we really could die from exposure to that which we had no immunity to. So xenophobia is built in. That's okay. That's all right. Torah's saying you can't act on it. Once you identify that you are treating someone as a ger and treating them differently, meaning for the worse because they're a ger, you have to change your behavior. Okay. Alex, then Judith.
What I wonder is, when it comes to borders. So administration after administration, Congress after Congress, no one has seemed to figure out an appropriate or an answer to this age-old question of when you're dealing with borders, right? And so what I wonder how the scholars would navigate that now.
What do you mean, policy?
Policy.
So the rabbis looking at the
and then
laws,
also if it backfires, sorry to interject, I'm also thinking in terms of anti-Semitism now. So I'm all for, people migrants being able to come. I mean, who are we to say and create these borders, right? But then on the other hand, what's pragmatic? I don't have the answer, and I think a lot of people don't. But so this one's tricky because how would we apply it currently to today's issue? So if you look at Europe and Angela Merkel, who went against all the advice of her administration and opened her borders graciously to let refugees and migrants in. And then, now there's quote unquote challenges dealing with that, especially when it comes to issues like anti-Semitism, whether that's right, wrong, I don't know, hearsay. Mm-hmm. But it is interesting to think about. So how do we approach it in terms of policy?
Okay. So thank you for the question. First of all of this law, over the thousands of years that there's been commentary on it, it's never had to be policy for the rabbis. It never had to be. The rabbis never had the ability to control borders. Right? Jews didn't have sovereignty. So number one, we have very little experience with what it means to actually put this into practice. So we could look
the only case study would be Israel. Right.
So we could look at ancient history and we could say, okay, how did ancient Israel handle this? But I don't know that that's so relevant given our ability to move around the way we can now on airplanes, and things. But what Torah is saying is make sure that you are electing people who will grapple with this question. And it's not saying here are the policies and here's how you make it so. It's saying be sure you as a society are organized in such a way that this is your main concern regarding the stranger. Now, you figure out what that looks like.
Well, that's been the paradox of the American experiment, which is give us your tired, give us your, and not. And the constant wrestling, incessant wrestling and poor execution. And we still, as a country, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of progress there.
But I don't know about you, but I'm not satisfied with even the way we're doing it now. Even the way we're having a conversation about policy. We're not having a conversation about policy. We have enforcement with no policy, really.
Correct.
I mean, so I'm not saying I have any policy ideas. That's way above my pay grade. What I'm saying is...
Well, come on, Rabbi Amy.
What I'm saying is my obligation as a Jew is to vote into power politicians who I feel like will take seriously the rights of the stranger and then figure out, okay, what does that mean? What are the policies, right, that we need to support? But we need to elect legislators who will put that as their primary concern. That's what I'm saying. I'm not a policy expert, but I am an expert on knowing what I'm seeing is not what I believe Torah wants. That's just
I think that it's been pretty
Jew's
consistent
opinion.
all along. I mean, even in different administrations,
Of
ones
course.
that I voted in,
No, of course.
millions of people were, being taken out of our country. So
No, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that anybody's gotten it right. What I'm saying is our obligation.
How do we make it better?
is to elect politicians we think will make it better. That's all we can really do in a democracy. That's what we can do. All right, Judith?
To go from a wonderful worldwide view like we were just presented with and talked about, to go into the minute in our own group. In the 70 years I've been a Jew, I have yet not to hear, oh, you're not really a Jew. You're an outsider. You're not an MOT. And I have a feeling that many Jews feel that same, many converted Jews feel that same outsidedness from members of our own community. It's changed a little bit, but not enough. And again, I think we need to work on that because we are probably the ones who've made great choices to be where we are, and it's never been easy. So from the big to the teeny.
Well, and the rabbis actually identify a ger as someone who's chosen Judaism. So
Yes.
They take all of these commandments to be about the convert.
Yes. Also.
Right. And then I'm proud of KI. I'm proud to be the
Me
rabbi
too.
of a synagogue where that's just, not only is that not so, but I feel like KI is in particular extremely excited that we live a kind of Judaism that people want to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm excited that you are our leader. Thank you, Amy.
An honor. So I want to show you, because Alex went right there. Yes, Dana, you're right. Even born Jews feel outsiders in some communities, which is, again, not what we have at KI, I hope. So let's look. I want to go to Alex exactly picked up on the point that I want to look at from Mijal Bitan's commentary. Let's see, where is it? Here it is. Woven throughout the Parsha, this Parsha, are commandments about how to treat the stranger. In context, the commandments are striking. The Israelites had been liberated from Egypt just months before. They carried literal and psychological scars. Some had lost children to Pharaoh's brutality. They were traumatized. There are two predictable human responses to trauma. One is to settle into permanent victimhood. The other is to become fascinated with the kind of power that once oppressed you, to imagine that control over others will finally secure you. Both shrink empathy. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks writes that hatred of the foreigner is one of the oldest human impulses. We are wired to protect our tribe and to view the unfamiliar as potential threat. Blah, 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 blah. Where do I want to go to? Here. Many American Jews, Alex, particularly those of us committed unconditionally to Israel, feel under siege. We see anti-Semitism rising and worry about our future. In the case of recent immigration flashpoints, some of the loudest activist and celebrity voices advocating against ICE have shown hostility toward us. It is hard to hear chants that erase you and then extend compassion to those they claim to represent. It is hard to hold nuanced positions in a world that insists compassion and open borders are the same. It is hard to be told that caring about the law makes you heartless. The Torah never denied that fear can feel justified, but it insists that we resist the thickening of the skin around our hearts that prevents us from seeing the stranger as human. The stranger is not the activist who claims to represent him. The Venezuelan family rebuilding their life is not the campus protester shouting slogans. The person crossing a border in desperation is not the NGO leader who partners with those who justify violence against Jews. We can believe in borders and still refuse to dehumanize. We can support enforcement and still recognize that most migration is driven by desperation. We can oppose activists who exploit immigrant suffering and still see the immigrant as bearing the divine image. This is not naivete. This is moral discipline. The Torah repeats the command about the stranger because it anticipates moments like ours, moments when fear feels reasonable, when tribal loyalty feels urgent, when empathy feels like vulnerability. MIshpatim does not tell us which immigration policy to adopt. It tells us who we are forbidden to become in the process. So, as always, I love when one of you goes exactly where I was going with our wonderful, insightful commentators. So she's touching on exactly the same thing that Alex raised. Bitan is a PhD in sociology who studies Sephardic American Jewish communities. And so she's saying it's a tense moment for us who want to live up to this injunction to love the stranger and protect the vulnerable immigrant. And it's a moment when many of the folks in that business are aligning with anti-Semitic groups and voices and saying Jews are part of the power structure, Jews are white, Jews are colonialists, and Jews are part of the exploiting of other brown peoples, and therefore they cannot possibly be experiencing vulnerability. This is a lot of Bitan's work. This is what she does. She studies this intersection of both Jews being identified as part of the oppressor class, and on the right, Jews being identified as not white. Right? Jews will not replace us. Who's us? White people. So she says we are at this intersection, this inflection of both the right and the left identifying Jews as people who cannot claim vulnerability on the one hand and the rights of indigenous, like American white people on the other hand. Okay. Helene? You have to unmute. I know. I did it yesterday. I get it.
This is so relevant with what I'm dealing with now. I mean, this was just absolutely spot on. My feelings get very personal with people who are, who are protesting in Minnesota. and supporting brown and black people around the world, what's happening with immigration. And then I'm thinking, well, where the heck were you when October 7th happened? And not only that, but the pushback, the amount of anti-Semitism that reared its ugly head right after October 7th. So that's one thing. And then, of course, we get Zionism and what all that entails. Some people say that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and then we see this divisiveness within the Jewish community about what is an anti-Zionist. Can you support Israel and be an anti-Zionist at the same time? Or can you be an anti-Zionist and not be an anti-Semite? So there's all these layers that I see happening now, and I'm finding it very difficult to sort of reckon with all of it and find out some kind of a cohesive way of looking at it that brings down my level of anxiety. I mean, I was really taken with Buddhist monks who made the journey to DC, and they're talking about coming from love. So can we get to that place where we have less antagonism and more of an open heart of connecting rather than all this divisiveness? And of course, I see it coming from the top. I mean, it's just really quite remarkable what's happening in this country and how divisive we've become, and globally too. And I am concerned. We are tribal, and I am concerned. Yes, let's have the stranger come in, but then, as Alex mentioned, we see what's happening in the UK and Australia and Germany and some of these other countries regarding us being the other, the Ger, and it's a lot to navigate.
There's a lot there to unpack. I'm reading a lot these days about the erasure of Jews of color from the Zionist story. The world wants to see Zionism as colonialism, when in fact, so much of the founding of the state of Israel was about a home for Jews from Arab countries that were kicked out of Arab countries by the millions.
Right.
And that the world has literally whitewashed the Zionist narrative to be about white people from Europe coming in and taking over Arab territory. And I'm not saying some of that didn't happen. What I'm saying is I'm starting to learn how to reclaim, without needing to argue about it, just reclaim that it was Arab Jews who populated the early part of the Zionist land of Israel, and continues to, by the way. And so there's that. So part of it is just about challenging language and challenging assumptions that I've started to just gently do and just drop it in, right? When people want to say colonial, I'm like, wait, well, not exactly, right? Not exactly. There were millions of Jews who were kicked out of Egypt. They were kicked out of, Syria. They were kicked out of all of these places once Israel was declared a state. So anyway, I'm not to argue with people, because I just don't have the patience to argue with people, but I am starting to challenge the narrative, right? That is leading to so much of the world having such a negative attitude about Zionism. So that's number one. Number two, I am reading more about October 7th. If I can find it, I'll send you a link to all of y'all, a link to the article that says, in Israel, the conversation is very different about October 7th and about Gaza than the conversation here. So the word genocide never comes up in Israel. Never. Because it's simply not part of their understanding of what's happening, right? And this article I just read by some high up military folks in Israel said that the plan was to have the folks coming in from the south overwhelm the south, and then Hezbollah to come in from the north, and they would meet in Tel Aviv. So actually, the understanding of October 7th in Israel right now is that it could have been way worse.
Yeah.
So like we tend to think, oh, well, it wasn't that big a deal. Why are they bombing Gaza into a parking lot, right? And because the attitude in Israel is, had it gone the way they planned it, we wouldn't be having this conversation about Israel, because Israel would now be occupied by Hezbollah and Hamas, and then everybody else, right, in the region who would rush in to take over territory. So I hadn't really ever thought of it that way, that October 7th could have been a lot worse, and the forces over there are still working to make it so.
Yes.
So much so, are you ready for this? So much so that Israel is arming militias in Gaza. Israel is arming militias in Gaza to fight Hamas. So that's how bad it is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That Hezbollah's regaining its whatever. Iran is getting back on its feet. Hamas is going to regroup, and they'll be funded, we know, by lots of folks in the area. So I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I hear you.
I guess I'm trying to say they see this as an existential moment in a way that we get called hysterical if we understand it that way.
Right.
And I'm refusing anymore to be called hysterical by anybody when I read these kinds of reports, and looking back at what the plan was and the code word they used when this guy, the controlling guy, the general for the South, the code word he used was for exactly this scenario. And he knew what was happening, that they were trying to overwhelm the South so that then they could come in from the North. So I was like, wait, sorry. So a couple of things. So I'm trying to get educated myself in ways that I can just speak my truth without needing to argue with anybody.
Yeah.
And just say, I'm not hysterical when I acknowledge that for Israelis, this is existential. Yeah. They truly experience the situation as existential. And so do some Jews here when we talk about immigration and we talk about the folks who are supporting immigration and some of the immigrants coming in, whatever, then we need to have that conversation. And I am not going to apologize to anyone for being a Zionist. And if that causes division in our ranks, so be it. I'm not making a division, but I'm saying I will not apologize for being a Zionist, and I will not apologize for not wanting any part of a movement or any other kind of institution that supports anti-Zionist stuff. Period.
It's like asking us to be anti-American.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
The bottom line is how it's hard to make an argument on anything when a situation has so much nuance and multiple truths and that's when you have to think about beyond the Jewish experience. Everyone wants to just have an opinion and be righteous and not look at all perspectives.
But isn't the issue having the conversation with people? Well, I mean, it's like you can't have the conversation.
I don't know though, Dana, because I don't know that people want a conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think people want a conversation. So I used to be the big one about resetting the table and we're going to have a conversation. Like, that's a lovely idea. But I think most people don't actually want a conversation. They want to convince you that they're right. And I feel the same way. Like, I feel like I'm sorry, but I'm right on this one. But I don't need to argue with somebody about it, right? I'm just not gonna. It doesn't do any good. But I am going to start changing the rhetoric that gets thrown around and accepted as truth and as legitimate, like colonial, all that kind of crap. Like, I'm going to start using different language without arguing.
But Rabbi Amy, on the flip side of things, in terms of educating our young people, not just Jews, And, we have to be in conversation, because if we're not in conversation, what then? I do fully see what you're saying in terms of arguing against the righteous. But for me as an educator, I have to believe, I have to have faith in that education and being in dialogue with especially young people is critical.
So I'm not suggesting we should not educate. I'm not suggesting we should not host a conversation with our young people who disagree with us. I was talking about being in a room with, anti-Zionists out there in the world. I just don't choose to be a part of that conversation. Yeah. I just don't. It's not going to do any good for me, for them. There are educators who are brilliant at this, and they should be teaching their fannies off. That's their skill, that's their gift, that's their, challenge and obligation. I love that. And we should be 100% be doing that. But I'm not going out to have those conversations. It's just not, I don't find it productive. I don't find it useful. What I find useful is just changing how I speak, right? Knowing more facts, knowing more perspectives that help me feel confident and calm in representing my truth. And then I'm glad we have educators who are ready to help our anti-Zionist youth share their opinions and hold that space.
I'd love to have one of them.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that I think this problem with anti-Semitism goes fairly deep, or maybe it's more ignorance than anything. I was talking to someone who's not Jewish in one of the classes I take, and I mentioned this new program on PBS about the Jews and African Americans, Jews and blacks in America, and the intersectionality of it. And I watched the first program, and I thought it was very informative. And I got a reaction that, was like, yeah, I know that the African Americans, slavery was really a horrible thing, and it's terrible. But I got the feeling that then there creeped up this attitude about, Jews, they've had it easy, and again, this idea of white privilege, and I felt that she didn't really understand the discrimination that we've experienced in this country and the contribution that we've made. And then, of course, we've got what's going on now with Epstein and all the fallout from that. There's just so much going on that I find it a little difficult at times to navigate.
We're in a difficult moment, y'all. We're in a really difficult moment. Not just Jews. We are in a mess. Let's be clear. And I tell this to every kid I'm working with. I said, the reason you're going to give a speech about what kind of grown-up you want to be is because all those people who are gathered that day, need your antidote to the poison of our time. Cynicism, despair, right? We are freaking out. We adults are freaking out. And you have the possibility to alleviate some of that for them when we hear from you. I got this. I heard you. Here's my vision of what adults should be behaving like. And I tell them, for real, we're freaking out. It is a mess. And we come from a culture, we come from a tradition that says you don't get to give up because it's a mess. That's why we have Torah. We have Torah because it's a mess.
But that's what the nuance is here, is that ultimately we have to come back to being prideful in our people, yet that can come at the expense of othering. And so it's that what we're talking about today. And yes, we can focus on the anti-Semitism, but ultimately we have to come back to what is Torah teaching us, right? Yeah. Coming back to Torah, coming back to being Jewish and in conversation and the nuance of that.
Okay, Jim?
I posted on Facebook, going back to what somebody said before about our leaders. I think, given our election, our midterm elections, I want to hear whoever's running for office, certainly more so on the Democratic side. But whoever. The fundamental, besides policy, and I'm referring back to my post that I posted this on Facebook. I hope whoever is, whatever candidate, that whatever party that they're with, is that they call out, aside, and I'm not discounting policy, but really the overarching issue that we're dealing with is we in the United States have lost our moral compass. And, we are certainly as a country in the midst of a deep soul sickness. We really have to, look at ourselves as greed, hate, cruelty, and dishonesty driven by fear dominate us. In my opinion, yes. That's my take.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. All right, y'all. Thank you, as always, for your incredible attention. It's an amazing thing when we look at Torah text and go, oh, yeah, that's what's happening out there, right? Right outside the door, right? Like, that's what's happening. So, as always, thank you for your openness and willingness to engage.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.